The blue-skinned alien stood in front of the Great Council chamber, his hands shaking as he held the data pad. Ambassador Kethalar had never been so scared in his long life. The news he brought would change everything for the peaceful worlds of the galaxy. "The Vorthak Empire has destroyed another world," he said, his voice barely loud enough for the council members to hear. "That makes 17 planets they have turned to ash in just 6 months." The chamber fell silent. Representatives from dozens of different alien races sat in their special chairs, each designed for their unique body shapes. Some had fur, others had scales, and a few looked almost like walking plants. But they all shared one thing. They were all prey species who had evolved to avoid fighting. Council leader Zarath, a tall gray being with large, gentle eyes, spoke first. "Show us the recordings from Helios 7. The chamber's main screen lit up with images that made several council members look away. What had once been a beautiful world covered in crystal cities was now a burnt rock floating in space. The Vorthak had used their terrible bioweapons to kill every living thing on the planet in less than a day. "How many lived there?" asked another council member. 4 billion souls, Kethler replied. "All gone. The Vorthak left nothing alive, not even the smallest plants." The Vorthak were different from every other species in the galaxy. While most races had evolved from animals that ate plants or ran from danger, the Vorthak came from the top predators of their world. They were large, covered in hard shells like insects, and they only understood one thing: destroy everything that was not them. "What about our fleet?" Council leader Zarath asked. "Surely our ships can stop them." Admiral Veltar, the head of the Federation Navy, stood up slowly. His green skin had turned pale, and his 4 arms hung at his sides like dead branches. "We tried. We sent our best ships to meet them at the Rigel system." The Admiral activated another display. It showed the remains of what had been the Federation's 3rd battle group. Twisted metal and broken ships floated in the darkness of space. "They destroyed 47 of our finest vessels in less than 3 hours," Admiral Veltar continued. "Our particle beams barely scratched their armor. When we tried to board their ships, their warriors cut through our people like they were made of paper." The chamber erupted in worried voices as representatives talked among themselves. The Federation had enjoyed peace for over 800 years. Their military existed mainly to help with disasters and keep pirates away from trade routes. They had never faced an enemy that wanted to kill everything in the galaxy. "We need help," Kethler said, raising his voice over the noise. "We cannot stop them with our current forces." "From where?" asked Council leader Zarath. "Every member world has already sent their best ships and soldiers." Kethlar hesitated. What he was about to suggest went against everything the Federation believed in. For over 2 centuries, they had avoided contact with one particular world because its people were too dangerous. "There is one option," he said quietly. "Earth." The chamber went completely silent. Even mentioning that world made the peaceful aliens uncomfortable. Earth had been marked as a Class 12 death world, the highest danger rating possible. The planet was covered in violent storms, deadly animals, and worst of all, it was home to humans. "Absolutely not," said Admiral Veltar. "The humans are savages. Their world tried to kill them for millions of years, so they learned to kill everything else. We quarantined them for good reason." "But they are warriors," Kethler argued. "Real warriors, not like us. They know how to fight and win." Dr. Miracle, the Federation's expert on dangerous species, stood up. She was small and covered in soft, purple fur, and she looked nervous as all eyes turned to her. "The humans are indeed dangerous," she said. "Their world has extreme weather, deadly diseases, and predators that could eat most of us whole. But the humans did not just survive, they took control of their entire planet." She activated her own display, showing images of Earth that made several council members gasp. Massive storms that could destroy cities, temperature changes that would kill most known life forms, and oceans filled with creatures that had teeth longer than most aliens were tall. "Look at what their world did to them," Dr. Mirakel continued. "They learned to make weapons from rocks and sticks. They tamed fire when most species were still hiding from it. They fought wars against each other for thousands of years, always getting better at killing. That is exactly why we should not ask for their help, Admiral Veltar said. They might help us destroy the Vorthak, but then what? They could turn on us next. Council Leader Zareth raised her hand for silence. The great chamber became quiet again as everyone waited for her decision. She had led the Federation for 30 years, and her wisdom was respected by all member worlds. "Show me the human military records," she said. Dr. Mirakel brought up files that the Federation had gathered during their brief contact with Earth 200 years ago. The information made for frightening reading. Humans had weapons that could destroy entire cities. They had fought wars that killed millions of their own kind. They had even traveled to other worlds in their star system just to test bigger weapons. They have something called nuclear bombs, Dr. Mirakel explained. These weapons can turn a city into glass in seconds. They built thousands of them and pointed them at each other for decades. But they never used them all, observed Council Leader Zareth. No, agreed Dr. Mirakel. They learned to control their violence when they realized it could destroy their whole world. But the capacity for that violence is still there. The debate continued for hours. Some council members argued that asking humans for help would be like inviting a fire demon to put out a house fire. Others said they had no choice. The Vorthak would destroy the entire galaxy if nothing stopped them. Finally, Council Leader Zareth called for a vote. All in favor of requesting military assistance from Earth? The vote was close, but fear of the Vorthak won over fear of the humans. The message would be sent. 3 days later, Captain Jake Morrison was drinking coffee on the bridge of his small, diplomatic ship when the communication officer called out, "Sir, we are getting a transmission from outside the solar system. It is using the old Federation protocols." Jake set down his coffee cup and walked over to the communication station. The message was long and had been translated through many different alien languages, but its meaning was clear. The peaceful aliens who had once called humans too dangerous to talk to were now begging for help. "Set course for Earth," Jake ordered, "and send a priority message to Geneva. Tell them the galaxy is at war and they want us to join." As his ship turned toward the blue and white world that had made humanity into the most dangerous species in the galaxy, Jake wondered if the aliens really understood what they were asking for. They wanted help from Earth, but Earth did not just send help. Earth sent Deathworlders. The human fleet arrived at the Federation staging area like nothing the aliens had ever seen before, where Federation ships were smooth and curved like giant pearls floating in space. The human vessels looked like they were built for war. Sharp angles, thick armor plating, and weapon ports covering every surface made them appear more like flying fortresses than spacecraft. Commander Ryan Brooks stood on the bridge of his battleship Iron Will and studied the alien fleet through his view screen. The Federation ships were beautiful, he had to admit, but they looked fragile, like expensive art pieces that would shatter if you looked at them wrong. "Sir, we are getting a communication from the Federation flagship," reported his communications officer, Lieutenant Sarah Walsh. "They want you to attend a strategy meeting." Ryan nodded and prepared to shuttle over to the alien command ship. He had read all the files about Federation species during the trip from Earth, but seeing them in person was still strange. The shuttle bay of the Harmony Song was filled with creatures that looked like they belonged in a zoo rather than commanding a military fleet. The conference room was even more unusual. The ceiling was twice as tall as any human room, and the furniture looked like it was designed by someone who had never seen a human before. Ryan had to crouch awkwardly in a chair that was meant for a being with 4 legs and a tail. Fleet Admiral Zextai was a tall, thin alien with skin like polished silver and eyes that took up half his face. He moved slowly and spoke in a soft voice that reminded Ryan of a church service back home. "Commander Brooks, we are honored to have Earth's finest warriors join our cause," the Admiral said. "Your reputation for violence precedes you." Ryan was not sure if that was meant as a compliment or an insult, but he nodded politely. Around the table sat representatives from a dozen different species. Some looked like walking plants, others resembled overgrown insects, and a few could have passed for stuffed animals if not for their uniforms. "Let me explain our strategy," Admiral Zextai continued, activating a holographic display of the contested star system. "We will establish a defensive perimeter here around the Helios sector. Our ships will form a protective barrier while we evacuate civilian populations from threatened worlds. Ryan studied the tactical display and frowned. The Federation plan looked like something from a history book about ancient warfare. Ships arranged in neat lines facing the enemy head-on, with clear zones of engagement marked in different colors. What about offensive operations? Ryan asked. Striking their supply lines, targeting their command structure. The alien officers looked at each other with what Ryan guessed was confusion. Admiral Zextai's large eyes blinked several times before he responded. We do not attack non-military targets, Commander. That would be barbaric. The Vorthak will challenge us to honorable combat, and we will meet them in the designated battle zones. Lieutenant Commander Beth Palmer, Ryan's tactical officer, leaned forward in her too small chair. What if they don't fight honorably? What if they ignore your rules? The rules of warfare are universal, explained Ambassador Kethlar, who was also present at the meeting. All civilized species follow them. Even the Vorthak respect the basic principles of combat. Beth and Ryan exchanged glances. They had both read the intelligence reports about Vorthak tactics. The insectoid aliens showed no respect for any rules that humans would recognize. Your ships will be assigned to escort duty, Admiral Zextai told Ryan. You will protect the evacuation transports while our battle fleet engages the enemy. Ryan wanted to argue, but he held his tongue. The humans had been invited to help, and insulting their hosts on the first day would not make things easier. But he also knew that the Federation's plan would get a lot of people killed. 3 days later, the first Vorthak scouting force arrived at the edge of the system. Ryan watched from his bridge as the Federation fleet moved into their battle formation. The alien ships arranged themselves in perfect lines, like they were preparing for a parade rather than a fight. The Vorthak ships were ugly things that looked like they had been grown rather than built. Dark metal hulls covered in spikes and weapon ports, they moved through space like hunting spiders stalking their prey. Federation ships are opening fire, reported Beth from her tactical station. The Federation weapons created beautiful displays of colored light as they struck the Vorthak vessels. Particle beams and plasma bursts lit up the darkness of space like fireworks. But when the light show ended, the enemy ships were still coming, their armor barely scratched. Vorthak ships are closing to boarding range, Beth announced. Ryan watched, in growing horror as the enemy vessels rammed into Federation ships and began cutting through their hulls. Within minutes, Vorthak warriors were pouring through the breaches, their razor-sharp claws slicing through the gentle alien defenders like they were made of paper. The Federation crews were not warriors. They were explorers, scientists, and diplomats who had been given weapons and told to fight. Against the Vorthak, who were born predators, they stood no chance. Sir, the Federation flagship is requesting immediate assistance, Lieutenant Walsh reported. They have been boarded and are taking heavy casualties. Ryan had seen enough. All ships, this is Brooks. Engage the enemy, ignore the formation orders and attack at will. Sir, we were ordered to protect the evacuation ships, Beth reminded him. The evacuation ships will be next if we let this slaughter continue, Ryan replied. Launch all fighters and prepare for close combat. The human ships broke from their assigned positions and accelerated toward the battle. Where the Federation vessels moved slowly and carefully, the human warships cut through space like sharks, sensing blood in the water. Target the nearest Vorthak ship, Ryan ordered. Full missile spread, then close for ramming speed. The Iron Will fired everything it had at once. Nuclear-tipped missiles, kinetic penetrators, and plasma cannons all struck the Vorthak vessel within seconds of each other. The enemy ship's armor, which had shrugged off Federation weapons, cracked and split under the human assault. But Ryan was not done. Marine assault teams prepare for boarding action. Show these bugs how humans fight. Captain Danny Cooper led the first wave of human Marines onto the damaged Vorthak ship. Where Federation soldiers had panicked at the sight of the insectoid warriors, the humans adapted instantly. Powered armor, military stimulants, and weapons designed for close-quarters combat turned each Marine into a one-man army. The Vorthak had evolved to hunt prey that would run or hide when threatened. They had no experience fighting an enemy that, actively sought out combat and seemed to enjoy violence. The sight of humans charging toward them with battle cries and explosives confused and terrified the alien predators. Within an hour, the entire Vorthak scouting force had been destroyed. Not a single enemy ship escaped to report back to their fleet. The Federation officers stared in amazed silence as human salvage teams began stripping useful technology from the wrecks. Admiral Zextai contacted Ryan's ship with a mixture of gratitude and horror in his voice. "Commander Brooks, your tactics were highly effective, but they violated every principle of civilized warfare." Ryan looked at the tactical display, where Federation ships were still burning from Vorthak attacks. "With respect, Admiral, your civilized warfare was getting your people killed. We came here to win, not to follow rules that the enemy ignores." "But the cost," the alien admiral protested. "The violence, the destruction. The cost of losing would be much higher," Ryan replied. "Earth learned that lesson the hard way over thousands of years. Sometimes the only way to save lives is to end the fight as quickly and decisively as possible." As the human fleet regrouped and prepared for the next engagement, word of their tactics began spreading through both Federation and Vorthak communication networks. The galaxy was about to learn that there was a difference between soldiers and warriors, and that Earth had sent the latter. News of the human victory spread through the galaxy faster than anyone expected. The Federation Council held emergency meetings every day, arguing about the excessive force their new allies had used. Meanwhile, deep in Vorthak space, their military leaders struggled to understand reports that an entire scouting force had been completely destroyed, with no survivors. Major Kate Harrison stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed human base on New Geneva, watching alien farmers work in fields that stretched to the horizon. The Salathi were peaceful plant-like beings who had never seen violence worse than an argument over crop rotation. Now they lived under the protection of human weapons that could level mountains. "The locals seemed nervous," said Sergeant Mike Torres, joining her at the window. Kate nodded. "They asked for our help, but they did not expect us to build a fortress in their backyard." The human base was unlike anything the Federation had ever seen. Where alien military installations were designed to blend in with the landscape, the humans had built something that screamed danger from every angle. Massive gun towers, missile silos, and energy barriers surrounded the complex, like the walls of an ancient castle. But the real difference was not what could be seen. Deep underground, human engineers had installed something the Federation considered impossible: a military command center that could coordinate attacks across multiple star systems simultaneously. Captain Nina Foster sat in her stealth ship, Shadow, Strike, at the edge of Vorthak territory, studying sensor readings that would have been impossible for Federation technology to gather. The humans had deployed reconnaissance drones throughout enemy space, tiny machines that could hide in asteroid fields and monitor everything the Vorthak did. "Enemy supply convoy detected," reported her sensor operator, Lieutenant Tom Bradley. 12 cargo ships with escort vessels heading for their forward base at Kepler Station. Nina smiled coldly. The Federation would have ignored a supply convoy considering it a non-military target, but humans understood that armies needed food, fuel, and ammunition. Cut off those supplies, and even the fiercest warriors would become helpless. "Set intercept course," she ordered. "Signal the other ships in our group. We go in fast and hard." The attack lasted less than 30 minutes. Human ships appeared out of nowhere, destroyed the convoy, and vanished before Vorthak reinforcements could arrive. The enemy had lost months of accumulated supplies and had no idea how the humans had found them. Back at Federation headquarters, Admiral Zextai paced his office like a caged animal. The reports coming in from human operations made no sense according to everything he knew about warfare. The humans were not fighting battles. They were systematically destroying the Vorthak ability to fight battles. "They attacked a fuel depot yesterday," he told Ambassador Kethlar during their daily briefing. "A fuel depot, no military value whatsoever, just storage tanks full of starship fuel." "And the result?" Kethlar asked, though he already knew the answer. 17 Vorthak ships had to turn back from a planned assault because they could not refuel, the Admiral admitted. Without firing a shot, the humans prevented an entire enemy fleet from reaching its target. The door to the Admiral's office opened, and in walked Admiral Lisa Kane from Earth. She was a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes, but something about her presence made the room feel dangerous. Behind her came several human officers who moved with the fluid grace of predators. "Gentlemen," Admiral Kane said, settling into a chair that had been specially built for humans, "we need to discuss the current tactical situation." She activated a holographic display that showed the entire war zone. Red markers indicated Vorthak positions, blue showed Federation forces, and green represented human units. What surprised the alien officers was how few green markers there were compared to the damage they were causing. "You have been fighting this war like a game," Admiral Kane said bluntly. "Rules of engagement, designated battle zones, formal challenges. The Vorthak do not care about your rules, and neither do we. But surely there must be some limits," Admiral Zextai protested. "Some targets that are off limits, some methods that are too extreme." Admiral Kane's expression hardened. "The Vorthak just used biological weapons against Arcturus 7. 2.3 million civilians are dead. They dissolved the internal organs of children while their parents watched. Are you going to tell me that is within your rules of civilized warfare?" The room fell silent. The attack on Arcturus 7 had shaken the entire Federation. It was the first time in 800 years that anyone had deliberately targeted civilians on such a scale. "We formally request expanded authority to deal with the Vorthak threat," Admiral Kane continued. "No restrictions on targeting, no limitations on methods. You asked Earth for help stopping these monsters. Let us stop them." The debate that followed lasted for hours. Federation officers argued about principles and values while human commanders presented cold tactical analysis. In the end, fear won over philosophy. The Vorthak had shown they would kill billions of innocents without hesitation. The Federation gave humanity permission to do whatever was necessary. Commander Alex Rivera led the planning session for what the humans called Operation Deathblow. The conference room on the human flagship was packed with officers from every branch of Earth's military. Maps and tactical displays covered every wall showing Vorthak positions throughout their empire. "Phase 1 will be simultaneous strikes on their 17 most important star systems," Alex explained. "We hit military bases, supply depots, communication centers, and manufacturing facilities all at the same time." Colonel Marcus Webb, who would lead the ground assault on Vorthak Prime, studied the enemy homeworld's defenses. Their orbital platforms are designed to stop ship attacks. They were not built to handle kinetic bombardment from redirected asteroids. The room buzzed with activity as human officers refined their plans. Unlike Federation military meetings, which focused on minimizing casualties and following proper procedures, the humans discussed their operation like engineers solving a complex problem. Every aspect of Vorthak society that supported their war effort became a legitimate target. "What about civilian casualties?" asked one of the younger officers. Admiral Kane answered without hesitation. "The Vorthak are a militaristic species. Their entire population supports the war effort. Their civilians work in weapons factories, their children are trained as soldiers from birth, and their government exists only to conquer other worlds. There are no innocent Vorthak civilians in the same way other species understand the concept." The operation began 3 days later. Across 17 star systems, human forces struck with coordination that amazed even their Federation allies. Supply lines that had supported the Vorthak military for decades were severed in minutes. Communication networks that had connected their empire for centuries went silent. Manufacturing centers that had produced their weapons for generations became twisted metal and cooling slag. But the most shocking part was not the scale of the attacks, but how few humans were needed to carry them out. Where the Federation would have needed thousands of ships and millions of soldiers, Earth accomplished the same results with small, highly trained units that struck precisely where the enemy was most vulnerable. General Patricia Hayes watched the tactical displays from her command ship as reports flooded in from across Vorthak space. Enemy fleets were surrendering without firing a shot. Entire worlds were requesting terms rather than face human assault forces. The empire that had terrorized the galaxy for over a century was collapsing in days. "Admiral Kane," she said over the communication link, I think we may have been too effective. The Vorthak are breaking faster than our intelligence predicted. Good, came the reply. The sooner this ends, the fewer people die on both sides. That was always the point. As human forces prepared for the final assault on the Vorthak homeworld, the galaxy watched in stunned silence. The peaceful species of the Federation were learning that sometimes the only way to preserve peace was to make war so terrible that no one would dare start another one. The humans had not just answered their call for help. They had redefined what help meant when Deathworlders decided to solve a problem. The final assault on Vorthak Prime began with something the galaxy had never seen before. Instead of warships and battle fleets, the humans used the asteroid belt around the Vorthak home system as their weapon. Engineering ships equipped with massive tractor beams redirected chunks of rock the size of cities toward the enemy planet. Colonel Marcus Webb watched from his command ship as the first asteroid struck the primary orbital defense platform. The impact released energy equal to 1,000 nuclear bombs, turning the massive space station into a brief new star that lit up the darkness. Within hours, the entire defensive grid that had protected the Vorthak homeworld for centuries was nothing but glowing debris. Begin ground assault operations, Admiral Kane ordered from her flagship orbiting high above the planet. The Vorthak had expected human ships to attack their orbital defenses, then land troops at specific zones for a traditional ground war. Instead, human forces deployed across the entire planet simultaneously. Drop pods fell like deadly rain, each one carrying a squad of Marines equipped with enough firepower to level city blocks. General Patricia Hayes led the main assault force toward the Vorthak capital city. Her soldiers moved through the urban landscape like a force of nature, adapting instantly to every obstacle the enemy placed in their path. Where Vorthak warriors tried to establish defensive positions, human engineers simply demolished entire buildings to create new routes of attack. This is not how wars are supposed to be fought, transmitted Admiral Zextai from his observation post far above the battle. There should be clear battle lines, organized resistance, proper military formations. The Vorthak stopped following those rules when they started using biological weapons on civilians, General Hayes replied, watching her tactical display as another enemy stronghold fell to human assault teams. We are just better at breaking rules than they are. The Vorthak military, bred for thousands of generations to dominate through superior size and aggression, found themselves facing an enemy that seemed to actually enjoy combat. Human battle cries echoed through the ruined streets as soldiers advanced through areas that should have been impassable. Where other species would have retreated or called for reinforcements, humans pressed forward with weapons blazing and smiles on their faces. Staff Sergeant Helen Moore led her reconnaissance team through the wreckage of what had once been the Vorthak Supreme Command Center. The building had been designed to withstand orbital bombardment, but human engineers had found its weak points and brought it down with precisely placed explosives. Movement ahead, reported Corporal Steve Parker, scanning the rubble with his thermal imaging system. Looks like enemy survivors. Helen signaled for her team to advance carefully. Around a corner, they found a group of Vorthak officers huddled in what remained of their command bunker. The insectoid aliens, who had terrorized the galaxy for over a century, looked up at the approaching humans with something none of them had ever experienced before. Pure terror. "We surrender," clicked their leader in badly pronounced Federation standard. "Please, no more killing." Helen lowered her weapon but kept it ready. "Why should we show you mercy? You showed none to the people of Arcturus 7. The Vorthak officers' compound eyes reflected the light from Helen's suit lamps. "We did not understand. We thought all prey species were weak like the Federation races. We did not know there were predators worse than us in the galaxy." Across the planet, similar scenes played out as the Vorthak military collapsed faster than human commanders had anticipated. Entire army groups surrendered rather than face human assault forces. Warriors who had never known fear began abandoning their positions and fleeing into the wilderness. The psychological impact of human warfare proved as devastating as their physical capabilities. The Vorthak had evolved as pack hunters who dominated through intimidation and overwhelming force. But when faced with an enemy that showed no fear and seemed to grow stronger in battle, Their instinctive responses failed completely. Admiral Kane received the formal surrender aboard her flagship. As the remaining Vorthak fleet commanders transmitted their capitulation to avoid complete annihilation of their species, the ceremony took place in the shadow of their homeworld, where the planet's surface still glowed from the kinetic bombardment that had ended their orbital defenses. The Vorthak Empire formally surrenders all military forces and territorial claims, announced Fleet Commander Krikstal, the highest-ranking surviving member of their military hierarchy. His voice carried none of the arrogance that had characterized Vorthak communications for over a century. Terms of surrender are simple, Admiral Kane replied coldly. Complete disarmament, dissolution of all military units, and reparations to the worlds you destroyed. Any violation of these terms will result in the permanent elimination of your species. The Federation observers who witnessed the surrender ceremony struggled to process what they had seen. A conflict that their computer models predicted would last decades had ended in less than 8 months. The Vorthak Empire, which had seemed unstoppable just a year before, now existed only as scattered populations of defeated refugees. Dr. Samantha White led the post-conflict analysis team, studying the implications of human military intervention. Her reports to Earth described a galaxy populated by species that had never experienced true warfare, their military doctrines based on ritualized combat rather than survival necessity. The Federation species fight wars like sporting events, she wrote in her final assessment. They have rules, boundaries, and expectations of fair play. The Vorthak fought like predators, using overwhelming force to dominate their prey. But humans fight like something else entirely, like a species that learned to survive by making war itself into a science. The aftermath revealed the true scope of human military effectiveness. Entire Vorthak worlds had been pacified by forces smaller than a Federation patrol squadron. Supply networks that had supported their empire for generations had been dismantled by teams of specialists who understood that winning wars required more than just winning battles. Captain Jake Morrison, whose ship had first received the Federation's desperate call for help, found himself assigned to the new Human Colonial Administration overseeing former Vorthak territory. As his vessel approached the first human settlement on a former enemy world, he reflected on how quickly everything had changed. "Sir, incoming transmission from the Federation Council," reported his communications officer. The message was formal and polite, but its meaning was clear. The Federation was offering humanity full membership with special status as the galaxy's military protectors. Other species were already requesting human advisors, while potential aggressors throughout the galaxy reconsidered their expansion plans. They got what they asked for, Jake said quietly, watching human colonists establish their first permanent settlement outside the Sol system. They wanted help stopping the Vorthak. They just did not realize that when you ask Deathworlders for help, you get a demonstration of why survival is more important than honor. The final entry in the Federation's historical record of the conflict would note that the galaxy had learned an important lesson. In a universe where violence sometimes became necessary, there was no substitute for absolute, overwhelming superiority. The peaceful species who dominated galactic civilization now lived under the protection of beings who viewed warfare not as a last resort, but as a problem to be solved with maximum efficiency. Earth had answered their call for help. But what the galaxy received was something far more significant. They had witnessed the emergence of humanity as the undisputed military power among the stars, and they had learned that sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was ask a Deathworlder to save your civilization. The humans had not just won a war. They had redefined what winning meant when the survival of everything you cared about was at stake.